Most people imagine a medieval fortress as a place filled only with guards, armored soldiers, and echoing halls. But behind those thick walls, far from the noise of the outer gates, everyday life depended on people whose names rarely appeared in any chronicle. Quiet workers kept the fortress warm, clean, organized, supplied, and functioning, not through dramatic duties, but through small, steady routines carried out day after day. Tonight, we re-stepping inside those walls to meet the overlooked hands who made an entire stronghold feel alive, the lamp tenders who checked every flame before sunrise, the key keepers who memorized every door, the quiet archivists who protected records, and the corridor runners who connected one corner of the fortress to another before most people even woke up. These forgotten jobs were simple, patient, and deeply human, perfect for a slow exploration as you unwind. Before we begin, if these calm journeys into hidden corners of history help you relax or drift towards sleep, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It truly supports the channel. And tell me in the comments, which job do you think you'd have taken if you lived inside a fortress? Something quiet, something orderly, something early morning, or something behind the scenes? Your answers always inspire the next episodes. Now get comfortable, breathe slowly, and let us walk through silent corridors as dawn approaches, into the forgotten jobs inside a medieval fortress. Long before the first footsteps echoed across the main courtyard, before any steward unlocked storerooms, and before the morning bell marked the start of the day, several workers inside the fortress were already awake, moving quietly through dim corridors lit only by the faint glow of wall lamps. Their tasks were neither celebrated nor recorded in grand documents, yet without them, the fortress could not function smoothly. They were the early risers, people whose work began in the stillness of dawn, when the stronghold felt more like a sleeping household than a center of authority. Their routines unfolded in silence. These workers learned to move with soft steps, to latch doors gently, and to complete tasks without disturbing those still resting in the upper chambers. Even in a space known for its imposing walls and constant activity, the earliest hours of the day held a calm that belonged only to them. One of the first to rise was the lamp tender. This person's work began when the sky was still dark, long before sunrise. The lamp tender lived in a small chamber near the center of the fortress, chosen so they could reach every corridor quickly. When they awoke, they wrapped a cloak around their shoulders, lit a small hand lantern, and stepped into hallways that had been burning lamps through the night. Their task was simple: check every flame, refill oil if needed, and replace any wick that burned low. Yet this was not a fast job. They moved slowly, examining each lamp's glass or metal housing, looking at the color of the flame, and noting which lamps needed more oil tomorrow. The lamp tender seemed almost part of the fortress itself, quietly maintaining the soft light that guided early footsteps. As the lamp tender worked, another early riser began his routine: the water carrier. Many fortresses had wells or large cisterns inside their walls, but water still needed to be collected, poured, and distributed to kitchens, washing rooms, and work areas. The water carrier started his day in the courtyard, the air cold and still. He lifted wooden buckets with sturdy handles and filled them at the well, listening to the deep echo of water splashing far below. Then he carried the buckets along the same paths each morning, placing them where cooks would reach for them later, where cleaners would need them for washing floors, and where craftsmen kept their workspaces ready. He learned to walk steadily, preventing water from spilling, and to place each bucket in the same spot daily so no one searched for what they needed. His routine was unchanging, yet essential. Inside the fortress kitchen, before the large hearth glowed with morning fires, the hearth starter arrived quietly, carrying a bundle of dry kindling. The main hearth was the largest source of heat in the fortress. It warmed the kitchen, heated water throughout the day, and provided meals for everyone living inside the walls. Starting this fire was an early responsibility requiring patience. The hearth starter arranged the kindling carefully, placing small wood chips underneath larger pieces. They used a small iron tool to coax sparks into the dry material, then blew gently until thin smoke curled upward. The fire grew slowly, and as it warmed the stones surrounding it, the kitchen transformed from a cold, shadowed room into a comfortable space ready for the day's work. By the time the cooks arrived, the fire was steady, waiting for pots and pans to be set upon the grate. While the lamp tender, water carrier, and hearth starter each moved through their quiet routines, the key keeper began his own. Unlike the others, the key keeper's tasks required both memory and routine. Every fortress had many doors, storerooms, armories, kitchens, workrooms, stairwells, and chambers used for meetings or storage. Although this fortress did not rely on complicated locking mechanisms, certain doors remained closed overnight for practical reasons. The keykeeper's job was to unlock these spaces before the day began. He carried a ring of keys that jingled softly when he walked, though he learned to steady them with his hand to avoid disturbing the quiet corridors. He unlocked each door in the same order every morning, ensuring that storerooms were accessible before kitchen staff arrived, that workrooms were open for craftsmen, and that certain hallways were passable before the first servants began delivering supplies. He took pride in remembering which keys belonged to which locks, never confusing them even in the dim morning light. Once all doors were opened, he returned to his chamber and placed the keys carefully on a wooden hook, preparing for the same round in the evening when the fortress quieted again. Another early riser worked in the tall, narrow room near the fortress's inner gate, the corridor runner. This person's job involved delivering small messages and notes written the previous night by stewards or organizers. In a time without fast communication, these early notes were essential for planning the day. Some messages reminded craftsmen of new tasks. Others alerted kitchen staff to expected visitors. Some simply listed supplies that needed to be counted. The corridor runner carried these notes in a small cloth bag and walked through nearly every hallway in the fortress, dropping messages onto tables, shelves, or hooks beside doors. Their footsteps became familiar to those who slept lightly, soft, quick, and consistent, always following the same route and never stopping long enough to disturb anyone. While these interior workers carried out their tasks, another early job unfolded in the outer courtyard. The stable tenders' dawn duties. The fortress stables held horses not only for travel, but also for carrying goods and helping with internal transport. The stable tender arrived before sunrise to check the animals, refill water troughs, lay fresh hay, and inspect saddles or harnesses for wear. They brushed dust from the horses' coats, checked hooves, and prepared the animals gradually for the day. Although most fortress jobs had little to do with animals, the stable tender's work ensured that carts could move supplies smoothly through the stronghold. This job required calm movements, quiet speech, and gentle consistency. Horses responded best to steady hands. By the time the earliest hints of dawn appeared in the sky, another worker stepped into the fortress yard, the courtyard sweeper. Their job was simple but important. People passed through the courtyard all day, delivering goods, meeting visitors, tending to daily tasks. Overnight, wind sometimes pushed leaves, dust, or small debris across the open area. The sweeper began in one corner and moved slowly, pushing a bundle, broom across the flagstones, gathering everything into small piles. These piles were then carried in baskets to a place outside the main gate, where waste could be collected later. The sweeper's movements were unhurried, steady, and rhythmic, a gentle sound accompanying the earliest light of morning. Back inside the fortress, the linen folder began her day in a quiet upper room where fresh linen, cloths, and simple garments were stored. The fortress held many people, servants, workers, administrators, and washing took place constantly. Fresh cloth needed folding and sorting so it could be delivered later in the morning. The linen folder worked at a long wooden table, smoothing each piece carefully, stacking them into neat piles, and arranging them by size and use. Her hands moved steadily, following a practiced routine that kept the fortress supply of clean cloth organized. A similar job unfolded nearby, where the tool arranger inspected workrooms before craftsmen arrived. This worker's task involved checking that all tools, hammers, chisels, brushes, buckets, and small wooden implements were placed neatly on shelves or hooks. They wiped dust from surfaces, arranged tools by type, and made sure nothing was misplaced. Craftsmen could then begin their tasks without searching for equipment. The tool arranger worked quietly, often humming softly as they moved items into order, ensuring the day started smoothly. As the morning approached full light, the fortress gradually shifted from the silence of the early risers to the gentle murmur of workers arriving for the day. But the first calm hours, The hours shaped by lamp tenders, water carriers, key keepers, hearth starters, corridor runners, stable tenders, courtyard sweepers, linen folders, and tool arrangers set the foundation for everything that followed. Their routines created the conditions in which others could work efficiently, safely, and comfortably. Most people living in the fortress never saw these workers performing their tasks. They simply stepped into a clean corridor, a warm kitchen, a stocked room, or a tidy courtyard and assumed everything was ready because the day had begun. Yet the early risers shaped the fortress more quietly than any official or steward. Through their steady rhythms and unchanging consistency, the stronghold woke gently each morning, prepared for the tasks and routines that defined its daily life. Their jobs may be forgotten in written history, but inside the fortress, their presence was essential, woven into every corner of the dawn, every lit lamp, every bucket of water, and every space made ready for another day. After the early risers completed their dawn routines, and the fortress gradually filled with the gentle footsteps of cooks, stewards, and workers beginning their day, another group of individuals stepped into their roles, people whose duties unfolded throughout the long daylight hours, yet rarely attracted attention. These were the quiet maintainers, the workers who ensured the fortress functioned smoothly from morning to evening, always nearby, but never intrusive, always contributing, yet rarely noticed. Their tasks may not have held the grandeur of decision-makers or the visibility of officials, but without their steady presence, the fortress would quickly fall into disorder. They were the backbone of daily operations: cleaners, record keepers, supply trackers, corridor assistants, and many others whose jobs were essential in subtle but constant ways. Among the first to begin this daytime work was the floor sweeper, different from the courtyard sweeper, who worked outside before sunrise. This floor sweeper tended to the long interior corridors, narrow staircases, and side chambers that collected dust throughout the day. Carrying a simple broom made of bound twigs and a cloth-wrapped bucket, the sweeper moved along stone hallways that echoed softly with each step. The task required rhythm, not speed. They swept in long, slow arcs, guiding dust into small piles, then used a wooden dustpan to collect and empty them into the bucket. Their presence was quiet enough that others passed without interruption. By the time midday arrived, the corridors no longer showed signs of the morning's traffic. Another silent figure worked nearby, the woodbringer. Every room with a hearth, kitchens, workshops, and some communal chambers needed a steady supply of dry firewood. The woodbringer moved through the fortress carrying bundles of chopped logs on their back, supported by a thick strap across the forehead. Each bundle was sorted by size: larger logs for long-lasting heat, smaller pieces for starting fires or maintaining warmth. The woodbringer visited each hearth throughout the day, stacking logs neatly, making sure wood stayed dry, and reorganizing piles so the next shift of workers always had what they needed. Their careful arrangements became familiar. Neat squares of stacked wood aligned against the stone walls. Not far from them worked the ash collector, whose task complemented that of the woodbringer. Hearths accumulated ash constantly, and too much ash reduced airflow, making fires burn unevenly. The ash collector carried a covered pail and a small shovel and moved through the fortress removing cooled ash from hearths, then emptying the pail in a designated outdoor area. The job required timing. Ash could not be removed while flames were high, and workers needed to judge when coals were cool enough not to cause smoke. Their judgment came from experience, recognizing the faint change in color that indicated ash was safe to gather. They performed their work slowly, taking care not to disturb kitchen workers or craftsmen. Meanwhile, in the quieter rooms near the center of the fortress, the linen patcher settled into her day's work. The washing process was labor-intensive, and cloth items wore easily, so the linen patcher inspected garments, towels, bedding, and work cloths for small tears, frayed edges, or thinning areas. She sat at a sturdy wooden table with a basket of thread, cloth scraps, and needles. Her hands moved with gentle precision, stitching small patches or reinforcing weak seams. The rhythm of sewing, steady and repetitive, helped maintain the fortress supply of usable cloth. When finished, she folded each item and placed it into neat piles for the linen distributor to deliver later. In another chamber adjacent to the storerooms, the herb sorter spent her mornings preparing small bundles used in cooking, cleaning, and simple household remedies. Fortresses relied heavily on stored herbs, dried mint, sage, lavender, thyme, and others. The herb sorter opened large cloth sacks, checked the condition of the dried leaves, and separated them into wooden bowls. She handled each leaf gently, inspecting color and scent. Her task may have seemed minor, but cooks depended on these organized bundles to flavor meals and prepare basic mixtures for cleaning and scenting rooms. Without her sorting, the storeroom would quickly fall into disarray, making it difficult for anyone to find what they needed. Across the hall, the supply checker reviewed the items in different storerooms: grains, oils, dried foods, tools, spare cloth, rope, and small equipment. This person kept track of quantities using wooden tallies or simple parchment lists. Their job was not to distribute supplies, but to notice when something began to run low. They carried a small tablet and charcoal stick, marking down levels each morning and sometimes again in the afternoon. These notes helped stewards plan purchases or arrange for more supplies to be delivered from nearby farms or workshops. The supply checker's calm routine ensured no one encountered shortages unexpectedly. In the busier areas of the fortress, the tray carrier moved between rooms delivering items prepared earlier in the morning. This worker did not cook meals or prepare spices, but carried trays of food, utensils, or supplies from one place to another. They were familiar with every hallway, staircase, and doorway, choosing paths that avoided crowded areas. Their footsteps were steady, and their balance was exceptional. Trays rarely wobbled. The tray carrier made the fortress feel connected, moving silently through spaces that served different functions. Another subtle job belonged to the message repeater. While early morning notes were delivered by the corridor runner, daytime instructions often needed to travel from one room to another. Without fast communication, verbal messages became essential. The message repeater walked calmly through the fortress with a list of names and rooms, delivering simple instructions. A worker needed help in the kitchen. A steward requested more cloth. A craftsman needed additional timber. This job required clarity and reliability. The message repeater spoke softly, repeated instructions word for word, and ensured the intended person understood before moving on. Their mental precision kept the fortress schedule coordinated. Meanwhile, in the administrative side of the stronghold, the record setter performed the quiet work of copying notes, counting entries, and keeping track of who completed which tasks. This was not a grand chronicler writing about major events, but a practical worker updating the fortress's internal lists, deliveries received, items distributed, rooms cleaned, and daily tasks completed. The record setter sat at a wooden desk near a narrow window, using simple ink and parchment. Their work required calm focus. They wrote slowly to avoid mistakes, ensuring all records remained clear for stewards who reviewed them later. Not far from them, a different but equally quiet job unfolded in the storage hall, the shelf straightener. Throughout the day, people searched shelves for tools, pots, jugs, and supplies. Items were often returned hastily or placed in the wrong areas. The shelf straightener walked through the storerooms several times daily, putting everything back into order. Their task was subtle but vital. Without them, finding anything would become time-consuming. They worked without complaint, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a tidy environment. Across another section of the fortress, the door dresser inspected and adjusted wooden doors. Temperature changes throughout the day caused wood to swell or shrink slightly, affecting how doors opened or closed. The door dresser checked hinges, smoothed rough edges with small files, and ensured every door swung gently without sticking. People rarely noticed this work, but the smooth movement of doors reflected their careful attention. During busy hours, the spill wiper moved between rooms, cleaning up small messes, spilled water, dropped flour, traces of mud carried from outside. They carried cloths, a small bucket, and a brush. Their task helped maintain cleanliness where many workers passed through. They didn't interrupt conversations or tasks. Instead, they slipped between groups quietly, wiping surfaces before moving on. Another consistent presence was the air circulator, responsible for opening or closing small wooden shutters near narrow windows. These shutters allowed fresh air into interior rooms and prevented spaces from becoming too warm or too damp. The air circulator checked rooms throughout the day, adjusting shutters depending on sunlight, wind level, or temperature. Their job ensured workers felt comfortable, especially in rooms with active fires or work requiring concentration. The fortress also relied on the bucket repairer, whose duty was to inspect wooden buckets, basins, and small containers used for carrying water, sand, or supplies. Baskets likewise needed repairs. Small cracks, loose bindings, or worn handles were fixed immediately. The repairer sat near the courtyard on a small bench with replacement wood pieces, strips of leather, and basic tools. Their repairs prevented leaks or breaks that might slow down work or cause messes. Each of these quiet maintainers contributed to the fortress's overall rhythm. Their jobs required patience, attention, and a willingness to focus on tasks few people ever noticed. Yet their work shaped daily life more than many realized. Without clean floors, steady fires, organized shelves, repaired tools, clear messages, or working shutters, the fortress would quickly fall into confusion. Throughout the afternoon, these workers continued their routines. None of them rushed, even when tasks grew repetitive. Their movements followed patterns learned over years: sweeping, arranging, delivering, repairing, adjusting. They took short breaks in shadowed corners, sipping water or stretching their hands before quietly returning to their duties. Their presence blended seamlessly into the background, supporting every other job happening inside the stronghold. By the time evening approached, the quiet maintainers had already completed dozens of small tasks. Their contribution was not marked by loud announcements or recognition. Instead, their success was measured by the absence of problems. No cluttered hallways, no cold kitchens, no messy storerooms, no misplaced tools, and no confusion about daily needs. When the day finally drew to a close and the last light drifted down through narrow windows, the fortress felt orderly and cared for because of these workers. As evening routines began and the keykeeper prepared to close certain rooms again, the quiet maintainers stepped away from their tasks with calm satisfaction. They were never the focus of stories, but they ensured every other chapter of fortress life could unfold without interruption. And though history seldom recorded their names, their steady contributions were woven into the structure's daily rhythm, as essential as the stones beneath their feet. While some fortress workers carried buckets, swept corridors, or tended lamps, another group shaped the rhythm of the day through quiet organization. These individuals rarely handled heavy tasks or visible chores, yet they ensured every moment inside the stronghold unfolded in order, without confusion. Their strength was not physical but administrative, though not in the modern sense of written bureaucracy. Instead, they used observation, memory, and gentle guidance to coordinate a wide range of activities. They were neither leaders nor stewards. Rather, they were the fortress's soundless organizers, working quietly behind the scenes. Their routines unfolded so subtly that many people inside the fortress never realized how much they depended on them. The first of these organizers was the hallway coordinator, a worker whose job involved watching the movement of people through the fortress and adjusting pathways so work never collided or slowed. This coordinator began the day by walking through the main corridors, noting which routes would become busiest based on schedules, meetings, deliveries, or household tasks. They rearranged small items that could block passageways, baskets, stools, or carts, and made sure doorways remained clear. If a large delivery was expected, the hallway coordinator gently redirected foot traffic, suggesting alternate paths or shifting items aside. Their presence was soft-spoken. They did not carry authority, only helpful suggestions. People trusted their sense of timing and space. By mid-morning, when the fortress came fully alive, the hallways moved smoothly thanks to their planning. Working nearby was the room arranger, a person responsible for preparing interiors before meetings, storage activities, or communal gatherings. The room arranger anticipated needs before they were expressed. They straightened benches, set out writing boards, adjusted lighting by opening or closing shutters, and ensured everything was placed in predictable locations. If the steward planned a discussion in a meeting room, the room arranger entered early and prepared the table, placing chairs evenly and brushing dust from surfaces. If a craftsman needed space to work indoors during cold weather, the room arranger cleared the room the night before. This job required deep awareness of the fortress's pattern of use. The room arranger learned which spaces tended to get crowded, which corners collected clutter, which rooms required extra preparation in certain seasons. Their instinct for anticipating needs kept the fortress running without last-minute confusion. Another soundless organizer was the supply tracker's assistant, who supported the main supply checker but focused on daily movement rather than long-term inventory. This assistant followed deliveries from storerooms to kitchens, workshops, or chambers, noting mentally which areas used more supplies than usual. At midday, they walked through storerooms again to see how items had shifted, adjusting baskets or shelves so workers could find things easily. They noticed small patterns, like which herbs cooks reached for most often or which tools craftsmen borrowed repeatedly. Their quiet observations allowed the steward to maintain balanced distribution. Next was the schedule aligner, one of the most invisible yet essential roles inside a fortress. This worker did not carry a written list, but held the day's structure entirely in memory. They moved from room to room, asking gentle questions. Are you still planning to use this space at midday? Will the storeroom need to be clear by afternoon? Is the kitchen expecting extra hands today? Their role was conversational, but behind every question was the goal of preventing overlap or congestion. For example, if the meal preparation area needed extra space in the afternoon, the schedule aligner made sure no other group planned to use the adjacent rooms. If the craftspeople had a delivery arriving, the schedule aligner ensured the courtyard remained accessible at that hour. Their work helped avoid situations where many workers converged in the same area unexpectedly. Another indispensable member of this quiet administrative group was the passage attendant. This worker's job was to ensure narrow staircases and side corridors remained manageable throughout the day. Many fortress stairways were too tight to allow two people to pass comfortably, so timing mattered. The passage attendant observed movement along these routes and guided people with subtle hand gestures. When two workers approached a staircase simultaneously, they gently indicated who should go first. They helped those carrying large baskets or tools navigate turns, sometimes stepping into alcoves to allow others to pass. This role demanded patience and awareness. Most inhabitants barely noticed these small gestures, but without them, stairways and corridors would become congested very quickly. Farther inside the fortress, often near storerooms, the crate arranger contributed to the organization of daily movement. Deliveries arrived throughout the day: sacks of grain, bundles of cloth, jars of oil, baskets of herbs, or wooden containers. The crate arranger inspected each item and assigned it a temporary place before storeroom workers categorized it. They stacked crates so they were easy to access, grouping them by size or fragility. Their arrangement ensured no crate blocked doorways and that lighter items sat above heavier ones to avoid crushing anything delicate. Though their task might seem simple, it prevented unnecessary delays. Workers arriving to retrieve supplies knew exactly where recently delivered goods were placed because of the crate arranger's neat and predictable system. Another quiet but vital organizer was the noise balancer. Fortresses were not meant to be silent, but certain rooms required calm: workrooms, writing chambers, or areas where decisions were made. The noise balancer walked through busy areas listening to the volume of activity. If a hallway became too lively, or if tasks involving scraping, grinding, or moving heavy items took place near calmer areas, the noise balancer redirected the activity. This redirection was never forceful. They simply suggested moving a bench, adjusting the angle of a table, or relocating certain materials to a quieter spot. Craftspeople and servants trusted these recommendations because they made work easier for everyone. The noise balancer also coordinated with the room arranger to shift loud tasks into more suitable areas. In the heart of the fortress, the task caller worked closely with the schedule aligner. As the day progressed, the task caller reminded workers of their next duties. Using a soft voice, they approached craftsmen, kitchen workers, or cleaners and gently notified them when a task needed to begin or when a new group needed access to a particular space. Their reminders prevented tasks from being forgotten or delayed. Unlike a strict overseer, the task caller acted more like a helpful guide, ensuring productivity stayed consistent without pressure. The window adjuster was another soundless organizer with a subtle but significant role. Fortresses were filled with narrow windows and shutters that controlled airflow and lighting. The window adjuster monitored rooms throughout the day, opening shutters to let in morning light, closing them slightly when sunlight became too harsh, and adjusting them again in the evening to allow a comfortable breeze. Their awareness of changing temperatures and light patterns kept interior spaces comfortable and functional. Workers often did not notice these adjustments, but they appreciated the comfort created by the improved environment. Of all the soundless organizers, perhaps the most intricate job belonged to the path planner. This worker studied movement inside the fortress like a quiet mapmaker, observing which areas experienced heavy foot traffic in the morning, midday, and late afternoon. They understood the rhythm of each hallway, where cooks would pass carrying food, where workers fetched tools, where storage deliveries arrived, and where quiet workrooms needed peace. The path planner used these observations to recommend small adjustments. They might shift a table slightly, move a bench to the opposite wall, or change the location of a water bucket to reduce unnecessary movement in tight areas. These simple changes created fluid movement across the fortress. While most inhabitants assumed the fortress naturally worked smoothly, it was often the path planner's subtle influence keeping everything balanced. An equally important role was carried out by the light watcher. Their task was to ensure that dim hallways never grew too dark for safe passage. They checked lamps throughout the day, not to refill them like the lamp tender, but to adjust them, replace wicks if needed, and make sure the glass covers remained clean. The light watcher also monitored how sunlight moved through the fortress. When late afternoon shadows created dim spots on staircases, they lit additional lamps so workers descending in the evening would have clear visibility. This job required a sense of timing and care, ensuring each lamp contributed to a safe and comfortable atmosphere. Another subtle but impactful worker was the small repairs adjuster, someone whose role was not major carpentry, but fixing tiny issues before they became problems. If a wooden bench felt slightly unstable, they tightened the joint. If a hook on a wall was loose, they secured it. If a hinge squeaked, they applied a drop of oil. Their repairs took only minutes, but because they performed them consistently throughout the day, larger issues rarely developed. This person's presence kept the fortress functioning seamlessly, preventing disruptions before anyone noticed them. The final group among these soundless organizers were the flow watchers, workers positioned in the busiest sections of the fortress who simply observed the movement of people and materials. Their job was to notice when a hallway became too crowded, when workers unintentionally delayed each other, or when a specific group struggled with timing. They communicated quietly with the schedule aligner or passage attendant to correct the flow. Their role mirrored that of unseen conductors, guiding the rhythm of daily life without touching a single tool. As the afternoon matured into evening, each of these soundless organizers gradually completed their rounds. The fortress often felt orderly without anyone being able to explain exactly why. Floors were clear, rooms were ready, pathways remained open, deliveries moved efficiently, and no single area felt chaotic or overcrowded. Most inhabitants never stopped to wonder who coordinated these subtle details. They simply felt that the fortress worked, not through force or command, but through a gentle structure maintained by people whose names were seldom mentioned. These organizers did not seek recognition. Their satisfaction came from seeing the fortress run smoothly. They understood that their influence came not from authority but from attentiveness, awareness, and a commitment to making each day unfold naturally. When the evening lamps were lit and night approached, the soundless organizers completed their final checks, making small adjustments that prepared the fortress for the quiet hours ahead. Then they stepped back, blending into the background once more, allowing the structure they had shaped through quiet coordination to continue breathing calmly through the night. Their work formed the hidden framework of fortress life, a stable, reliable rhythm that ensured every other person inside those thick walls could perform their tasks with comfort and ease. Inside a medieval fortress, communication did not travel through bells, complex systems, or written announcements pinned to walls. Instead, countless small messages moved through the stronghold carried in the pockets, hands, and memories of discrete individuals whose role was to connect spaces that otherwise felt far apart. These workers, messengers, runners, and quiet go-betweens, formed the invisible threads binding the fortress into a single, coordinated structure. Without them, daily tasks would drift out of rhythm, schedules would slip, and essential information would stay trapped in the wrong rooms. Their work required neither speed nor urgency. Instead, it demanded consistency, calm movement, and the ability to remember details as they walked. Theirs was the soft pulse of fortress communication, an unbroken flow from dawn until evening. The first of these workers was simply known as the inner messenger, someone whose responsibility centered on the internal chambers of the stronghold. They began their day shortly after sunrise, moving from room to room with quiet steps. Their satchel held folded pieces of parchment, each one containing small notes written by stewards or senior staff the previous night. Some notes reminded kitchen workers about ingredients needed that day. Others asked craftsmen to repair something by afternoon. Some informed cleaners which rooms needed extra care. Each piece of paper carried practical information, and the messenger delivered them with a sense of routine that kept the fortress organized. The inner messenger rarely spoke. When they entered a room, they simply set a note on a table or shelf and gave a polite nod before leaving. Their presence was unobtrusive, and people came to rely on the gentle sound of their footsteps to signal the arrival of instructions. Moving throughout the fortress alongside the inner messenger was the courtyard runner, who connected the outer sections of the fortress with its interior halls. This worker often carried items rather than written messages: a bundle of cloth for the laundry room, a replacement broom for the courtyard sweeper, or a new set of measuring spoons requested by the kitchen. The courtyard runner followed a familiar loop each morning. They passed through the front gates, stepped across the open courtyard where early workers swept the stones, and then disappeared into narrow passages on the opposite side. Their steady pace made them a predictable, comforting presence. The fortress breathed more smoothly because of the small objects they transported. Another role that linked different parts of the fortress was the upper-level walker. While most messengers moved horizontally across floors, this person's job focused on vertical connections, rooms located high within towers, meeting spaces in upper corridors, and storage chambers far above the bustle of the courtyard. Many of these rooms were not visited often, but they played essential roles. Some held documents, some stored important items, and some served as quiet spaces for planning. The upper-level walker climbed long spiral staircases daily, carrying candles, lamps, small notes, or bundles of folded cloth. Their familiarity with these heights made them indispensable. Without their steady movements, upper floors would remain isolated and forgotten. Working simultaneously in another area was the kitchen messenger, whose tasks revolved around ensuring that kitchen workers received all information needed to prepare meals for the day. This worker walked between storerooms, counting rooms, and kitchen spaces, relaying requests for specific herbs, spices, or supplies. They also took notes from kitchen staff and carried them to the steward's room. Because food preparation followed a precise schedule, the kitchen messenger maintained a calm rhythm, walking the same paths over and over, making sure nothing disrupted the flow of ingredients. A less obvious but equally important role was the meeting caller. This worker's task was to inform small groups when discussions or planning sessions needed to take place. Rather than shouting or gathering people loudly, the meeting caller walked quietly to each location, gently informing individuals of the time and place. Their calm tone set an atmosphere of order. People trusted their timing because the meeting caller was known for accuracy, never arriving too early, never arriving too late. Their sense of pace ensured that discussions began smoothly and without confusion. Nearby, often crossing paths with many others, worked the tool runner. This person traveled between workshops, carrying small but necessary items. A chisel dulled in one room and needed replacement from another. A wooden dowel ran out in the carpentry room and had to be fetched from storage. A small cloth pouch used in grinding herbs was accidentally left in a higher chamber and needed returning. The tool runner tied these small tasks together. They remembered where each item came from and where it needed to go. Their pockets often rattled with small metal pieces or soft cloths. They walked quickly but quietly, aware that their footsteps echoed in narrow rooms. One of the most distinctive messengers inside the fortress was the record courier, responsible for transferring list updates or written tallies between different administrative spaces. This worker served as a bridge between record keepers and stewards, carrying small parchments with inventory updates, daily checks, or requests for reorganization. They understood how important accuracy was in record keeping, so they carried documents carefully, often rolled inside a leather sleeve to protect them from dust or moisture. Across another part of the fortress, near the side passages, the supply errand runner played a vital role in distributing everyday items. If a cleaner needed an extra bucket, the supply errand runner fetched it. If a craftsman required more cloth for polishing tools, they delivered it. If a steward needed a certain item to prepare a list, the supply errand runner retrieved it. Their entire job involved responding to small needs that emerged in the moment, tasks too minor to assign to someone else, but too important to ignore. Their presence prevented delays across multiple work areas. Among the runners, one job required particular precision: the time passer. This worker walked across the fortress delivering time cues that helped everyone coordinate. Fortresses did not rely on mechanical clocks. Instead, workers estimated time by observing sunlight or shadows. The time passer helped formalize this. They walked through rooms at regular intervals saying soft phrases like "mid-morning approaches" or "afternoon tasks may begin shortly." These verbal cues kept the entire structure aligned without the need for strict timing. Workers trusted the time passer's judgment because they spent years observing the movement of the sun through windows and across courtyards. The strongest connector between distant areas, however, was the multipath messenger. This worker's job spanned the entire fortress, from outer gates to upper chambers. They carried messages between people who rarely saw each other: kitchen staff and administrative workers, stable tenders and storeroom staff, outer courtyard workers, and upper-level attendants. The multipath messenger never rushed, but moved with long, steady strides. They memorized complex routes and knew which pathways remained quickest at different times of day. Their knowledge of the fortress layout was unmatched. Other go-betweens specialized in particular tasks. The error corrector walked through the fortress, noticing when messages had been misdelivered or when supplies had shifted unexpectedly. They quietly corrected these issues, relocating a misplaced basket, clarifying an instruction, or guiding a confused worker to the right room. They did these things softly, restoring the intended order without drawing attention. Then there was the double-check walker, who followed behind major deliveries to ensure nothing was overlooked. If a delivery of cloth arrived, they checked to make sure each piece was placed in the right storage area. If a group of workers transported tools between rooms, the double-check walker ensured no tool was left behind. Their work reduced small mistakes that could cause larger disruptions later. Some runners carried no items at all. Instead, they carried awareness. The observation walker spent the day wandering through the fortress, quietly noting patterns of movement, areas of congestion, rooms falling behind schedule, or workers needing support. At the end of the day, they shared gentle suggestions with stewards, a recommendation to adjust room arrangements, a note that certain tools should be relocated, or a suggestion to shift tasks to quieter spaces. Their careful observations significantly shaped the next day's flow. Communication could also be visual. The signal pointer used small hand gestures to direct traffic in tight corridors or stairways. They indicated when someone carrying heavy goods should pause, or when a worker should take an alternate path. Their gestures were subtle, familiar to everyone, and kept crowded spaces from becoming difficult to navigate. The fortress even had a silent confirmer, whose job was to reassure workers that their messages had been delivered. After taking a note to a room or speaking with someone, the silent confirmer returned to the sender and gave a simple nod or gesture, indicating the task was completed. This reduced unnecessary second-guessing and kept communication clear. Throughout the day, these messengers and runners moved like currents beneath the surface of fortress life. Their footsteps were constant but gentle, their presence widely felt but never intrusive. They connected people, tasks, duties, and spaces in ways no one else could. Without their quiet coordination, the fortress would feel fragmented, isolated rooms performing unrelated tasks with no sense of unity. As the sun traveled across the sky and shadows shifted through narrow windows, the messengers continued their routes. Their paths overlapped in some places and diverged in others, forming a living network of communication as subtle as it was essential. By evening, as lamps were lit and the fortress quieted again, these runners returned to their chambers, satisfied that they had kept the day flowing without disruptions. Their contributions were invisible but profound, proof that even in a world of thick walls and heavy stone, the most important connections were often carried by the soft footsteps of people quietly moving from one room to another, holding the entire stronghold together. Inside a medieval fortress, tools and supplies moved constantly. Wooden buckets carried from cistern to kitchen, chisels borrowed by craftsmen, brushes used by cleaners, cloth bundles taken for patching or washing. and small items passed from hand to hand throughout the day. With so much movement, it was easy for objects to be misplaced, mixed with the wrong piles, or forgotten in corners where they weren't meant to be. Yet, somehow, the fortress maintained a sense of calm order. Tools rarely disappeared, supplies stayed neatly arranged, and workers always seemed to find what they needed. This quiet balance did not happen by itself. It was carefully maintained by a group of workers whose roles were as subtle as they were essential, the hidden keepers of tools and materials. These individuals rarely attracted attention. They did not supervise others, issue orders, or participate in loud tasks. Instead, they preserved organization through gentle vigilance. They watched, noted, rearranged, and restored. Their work created a sense of stability, ensuring the fortress operated smoothly day after day. One of the earliest to begin this quiet work was the tool steward, stationed in a small room near the center of the fortress where most tools were stored. This room was neither large nor elaborate. Its walls were lined with shelves, pegs, and wooden boxes. Each space had a designated purpose. Long-handled brushes in one corner, chisels sorted by size in another, small wooden bowls holding pegs and hinges, and neatly stacked cloths for cleaning or polishing. The tool steward's job was to maintain this order. Each morning, the tool steward opened the storage room's wooden shutter to let in a line of soft daylight. Then they examined the shelves, checking for items returned overnight or tools placed in the wrong spot. They arranged everything with patient hands, setting items at even distances, grouping similar tools together, and ensuring each shelf had space for air to circulate so it stayed dry. When workers arrived to borrow items, the tool steward greeted them quietly, noting mentally what was taken and when it was likely to be returned. They rarely questioned anyone. Trust defined their role, but that trust was backed by memory, an ability to recall which worker borrowed which tool even days later. Closely connected to the tool steward was the wood stack tender, who oversaw all wood used inside the fortress. This included firewood, wood for repairs, planks for carpentry, and small sticks used for cleaning the hearths. Their workspace sat at the edge of the courtyard under a covered shed. Here, they stored large logs in neat piles organized by size and thickness. Smaller bundles were tied with thin rope and hung from wooden beams to keep them dry. Everything the wood stack tender touched returned to a state of quiet alignment. Throughout the day, workers from different rooms came to collect wood. The wood stack tender observed how much each person took, making sure the piles remained balanced. If a certain type of wood began to run low, the tender made mental note to split more logs the next morning. Their main responsibility, however, involved watching how it flowed through the fortress. If a hearth burned more quickly than usual, or if workers requested more repair planks than expected, the wood stack tender quietly adjusted distribution so supplies lasted evenly across the week. Not far from this area, in a narrow corridor lined with crates, worked the cloth arranger. Their job involved managing cloth used for many tasks: cleaning surfaces, drying hands, wrapping supplies, or covering items stored in shelves. Cloth wore out quickly, especially in a busy fortress. As a result, the cloth arranger always had a stack of newly washed cloths ready. They folded these carefully, smoothing out edges and sorting them by size. The smallest cloths were grouped for polishing brass objects. Medium-sized ones went to the kitchens. Larger cloths were delivered to laundry rooms for drying or carrying items. The cloth arranger also handled damaged cloth. When the linen patcher finished repairing torn pieces, they returned them to this arranger, who reintegrated them into the correct piles. Without the cloth arranger, cloth would scatter across the fortress, forming mismatched stacks. Instead, everything stayed in its place. In a different corner of the fortress, the herb keeper performed a similar task with dried herbs used for cooking, scenting rooms, or preparing small household mixtures. The herb keeper's room smelled faintly of lavender, thyme, and mint. Wooden bowls filled with dried leaves covered the shelves, each labeled with a simple symbol carved into the rim. The herb keeper returned to this room many times a day, sorting new herbs brought from the storeroom, removing any leaves that had begun to lose color, and replacing small cloth covers that protected each bowl. When the kitchen messenger arrived with a request for herbs, the herb keeper measured out careful portions, tying them into small bundles. Their precision ensured the kitchen never used too much or too little. Their role extended beyond simply managing supply. It maintained quality and prevented waste. Another keeper with quiet influence was the rope organizer. Ropes of various thicknesses were essential in a fortress for daily tasks, carrying water, lifting items, securing crates, or tying bundles. The rope organizer stored ropes in a dry room where sunlight could not weaken the fibers. Long ropes were coiled in large spirals against the wall, while shorter lengths were wrapped around wooden hooks. Each type of rope had its own place. The rope organizer checked for frayed ends, removed any rope that had begun to weaken, and replaced damaged sections with fresh lengths. They sometimes sat outside under soft midday light, unraveling old rope to salvage usable fibers for smaller tasks. They also handed out rope when needed, advising workers on which thickness suited which job. Their guidance was subtle but invaluable. The right rope prevented countless small accidents. Another essential but easily overlooked role belonged to the bucket keeper. Wooden buckets and small containers were used constantly for carrying water, sand, herbs, or even wooden chips. The bucket keeper scrubbed these buckets each morning, checked for cracks, and ensured wooden hoops were tightened so nothing leaked. They arranged buckets in stacks by size, placing the most commonly used ones at the front. Anyone entering the storage room knew exactly where to find the bucket they needed, thanks to the bucket keeper's tidy system. Across the fortress, the tool polisher worked in a small room with a single table. This worker's job focused on maintenance of metal tools, chisels, small blades, hinges, hooks, and fittings. Using cloths and simple oil mixtures, the tool polisher rubbed each metal surface until it became clean and smooth. This polishing reduced wear, prevented rust, and extended the lifespan of tools used in daily tasks. They worked with slow, repetitive movements that matched the calming rhythm of fortress life. A related but distinct role was that of the handle mender, who repaired wooden handles on brooms, brushes, buckets, or tools. This worker sat on a low stool with a basket of wooden pieces beside them. When a handle cracked or splintered, workers brought it to the handle mender, who shaped a new piece of wood to fit the object. They sanded edges until smooth, fitted the handle into place, and rubbed it lightly with protective oil. Their repairs felt seamless, helping tools return to the fortress's daily rotation. A more specialized keeper was the jar sorter, responsible for organizing small clay jars used for storing grains, dried beans, or powders. These jars came in various sizes, each with a matching wooden lid. The jar sorter cleaned them, checked for cracks, and arranged them so workers could find containers quickly. Their system allowed for efficient storage and prevented food from spoiling. Deeper inside the fortress, a quiet worker known as the small items curator handled an assortment of tiny tools: nails, wooden pegs, small metal rings, bits of string, and other items easy to lose. They stored these in wooden trays with shallow compartments. Each compartment held objects of similar shape or size. The small items curator had precise memory. They knew exactly where every item belonged. Workers trusted this person whenever they needed something small and specific. Perhaps the most foundational among all keepers was the neatness inspector. Their job was not to clean or organize directly, but to observe organization everywhere. They walked through storage rooms, glanced at shelves, checked corners, and noticed when piles began to drift out of order. If something needed adjusting, they quietly fixed it themselves or made a gentle suggestion to the appropriate keeper. Their presence kept the fortress from slipping into slow disorder. Without them, tools might remain misplaced for days before being noticed. These keepers rarely spoke about their work. They let their hands guide them, restoring order one item at a time, shaping the fortress's rhythm not through loud commands, but through harmony and consistency. Their satisfaction came from seeing tools aligned perfectly, wood stacked evenly, herbs sorted neatly, and supplies ready for the next task. As the day progressed, the hidden keepers moved with steady purpose. They worked between the more visible activities, between meals, between deliveries, between bursts of movement in hallways. Their tasks fit naturally into the spaces others didn't notice, filling the fortress with a quiet efficiency that made every job easier for everyone else. By evening, when lamps were lit and workers prepared to finish their tasks, the hidden keepers performed their final rounds. They checked shelves once more, straightened tools, refolded cloths, and ensured the next morning would begin with the same calm order. Then, without ceremony, they left their spaces tidy and returned to their chambers. Their contributions remained invisible, yet every smooth moment inside the fortress depended on them. They were the silent guardians of order, shaping the internal world of the stronghold with nothing more than careful hands, patient minds, and the quiet pride of a job done well. Inside a medieval fortress, grand repairs were rare. The strong walls, heavy beams, and thick stone floors were built to last for centuries. But beneath the imposing appearance of the structure lay countless small parts: hinges, handles, shutters, benches, wooden pegs, straw mats, ladders, storage lids, water troughs, and simple tools that needed constant care. These items did not break dramatically. Instead, they wore down slowly, becoming loose, uneven, or weakened over time. If left unattended, these tiny issues would eventually disrupt the smooth rhythm of fortress life. This slow erosion of objects never became a problem because of a group of dedicated workers known informally as the quiet fixers. These individuals spent their days moving calmly through rooms, listening for faint squeaks, checking for loose joints, examining tools and furniture, and gently restoring everything before anyone noticed the need for repair. Their hands preserved the stable environment that made the fortress feel orderly every day. The quiet fixers were never loud or hurried. Their skill lay in the ability to see and solve problems early, moving through the stronghold with a calm awareness that kept everything functioning quietly beneath the surface. One of the most experienced fixers worked near the inner courtyard in a small corner room that smelled faintly of oiled wood. Known simply as the hinge tender, this worker's expertise focused on doors, shutters, and anything that swung on a pivot. They understood how it changed in different seasons, how hinges loosened with constant use, and how small adjustments prevented a door from sticking or squeaking. To perform their duties, the hinge tender carried a pouch of basic tools: small wedges, a wooden mallet, a hand drill, a jar of thick oil, and thin strips of leather used to cushion loose joints. Each morning, they walked through the fortress listening for signs: a faint groan when a door opened, a shutter that rested unevenly against its frame, a gate latch that moved with just a bit too much friction. They never waited for someone to complain. Instead, they stepped into the room, knelt beside the hinge, applied a drop of oil or tightened a pin, and tested the movement until it felt smooth again. Their repairs took only minutes, yet they preserved the calm rhythm of daily life. Close to the hinge tender's workspace, the bench leveler began the day inspecting wooden benches placed in corridors, workrooms, and dining areas. These benches supported workers during breaks, helped kitchen staff sit while preparing ingredients, or provided places for brief meetings. Over time, humidity caused wood to expand or shrink ever so slightly, leading to uneven legs. The bench leveler carried a small wooden wedge, thin sheets of leather, and a short rasp for smoothing rough edges. They gently rocked each bench to check its balance. If a leg lifted even a little, they adjusted it, placing a thin leather piece under one side or trimming a fraction of wood until the bench stood steadily again. Their work prevented countless awkward moments and allowed workers to rest comfortably without wobbling supports. Working not far from them was the shutter adjuster, responsible for maintaining the many wooden shutters that controlled airflow and lighting throughout the fortress. Shutters opened outward toward courtyards or inward toward narrow halls. They were essential for ventilation, especially when fires burned in several rooms. The shutter adjuster walked with a careful pace, touching each shutter along the wall to ensure it opened smoothly and closed tightly. If a latch became weak or a wooden bar moved loosely, they tightened it using wedges or replaced small parts with fresh wooden pegs carved by hand. Their adjustments kept rooms comfortable, neither too stuffy nor too drafty, and helped workers concentrate without distraction. In another area of the fortress, the rope mender tended to the countless lengths of rope used for tying sacks, lifting items, securing shutters, or bundling cloth. Ropes frayed gradually with use. Fibers loosened and ends grew fuzzy. The rope mender sat at a low table covered in small tools: a dull knife for trimming loose fibers, a wooden comb for smoothing strands, and pots of thick natural oil used to soften rope. Throughout the day, workers brought ropes for repair. The rope mender trimmed frayed areas, twisted fresh fibers into weak sections, and rubbed oil into the rope until it regained strength and flexibility. Longer ropes were coiled neatly beside them. Whenever a rope became too worn for heavy use, The mender cut away salvageable sections and repurposed them as smaller lengths for tying bundles. Nothing went to waste. A similar role belonged to the strap fixer, who maintained leather straps attached to buckets, satchels, tools, and storage lids. Leather dried out over time, and straps began to crack. If a strap broke suddenly, it could spill water, damage tools, or delay work. The strap fixer inspected straps throughout the fortress daily. They carried a small pouch filled with replacement straps, needles, and softening oils made from animal fat. When they found a strap that felt brittle, they removed it carefully and replaced it with a fresh piece cut to length. If the leather only needed conditioning, they rubbed it with oil until it regained its flexibility. Their work allowed buckets to swing safely, satchels to hold steady, and tools to be carried without risk. One of the more specialized fixers was the floor mat restorer, an individual who cared for the reed mats and woven coverings placed at doorways and transition spaces. These mats prevented slips, reduced dust, and offered comfort underfoot. As people walked across them daily, threads loosened, corners bent, and edges wore down. The restorer collected worn mats, repaired weaving using fresh reeds, and straightened edges. Because mats absorbed moisture from boots and daily use, the restorer hung them to dry at regular intervals. They rotated mats between rooms to ensure each one lasted longer. Their efforts created a sense of quiet order throughout the fortress. Clean entrances, tidy hallways, and comfortable walking paths. Farther inside, the ladder watcher took responsibility for one of the most critical yet overlooked items in the fortress: wooden ladders. These were used for reaching high shelves, cleaning soot from corners, and accessing upper alcoves. The ladder watcher inspected every rung, checking for cracks or loose pegs. If a rung felt unsteady, they removed it and replaced it with a fresh one carved from smooth wood. They tested each repair by climbing the ladder slowly, pressing their weight carefully, ensuring every step felt secure. Their vigilance prevented dangerous accidents and allowed workers to reach high places without hesitation. Another important fixer was the lid straightener, a specialist in correcting the fit of wooden lids that covered storage bins or jars. Lids warped slightly with humidity or frequent use, making them fit unevenly. The lid straightener carried a small plane, a rasp, and thin pieces of wood. They shaved edges, smoothed surfaces, and adjusted handles so each lid rested comfortably on its container. Their adjustments helped preserve grain, herbs, and small items stored throughout the fortress. Working in a quieter area was the chair rebalancer, whose job resembled the bench leveler but focused on chairs used by stewards or scribes. Chairs were more delicate than benches and required precise repairs. The rebalancer tightened joints, smoothed wobbly legs, and replaced small wedges with new ones. They always worked slowly, ensuring chairs supported upright sitting without shifting. Another subtle fixer was the surface smoother, responsible for maintaining the texture of wooden tables, shelves, and work surfaces. With constant use, would develop small splinters or uneven areas. The surface smoother walked through the fortress carrying a cloth-wrapped set of tools, rasps, sanded stones, and small pieces of pumice. They gently scraped rough areas, smoothed edges, and applied thin oil to protect the wood. Their efforts allowed workers to prepare food, sort supplies, or write documents without discomfort. In storerooms, the container tightener ensured that the lids of jars and boxes closed properly. They tested wooden boxes by shaking them lightly, listening for rattling. If they heard it, they adjusted the corners or added a thin lining of shaved wood. They replaced wooden pegs that no longer held frames together. Their hands were quick but gentle, always improving the lifespan of storage containers. Another important role belonged to the step stabilizer, who monitored stone and wooden steps across the fortress. While stone steps rarely cracked, wooden ones sometimes shifted or loosened. The stabilizer checked each staircase for movement. They secured loose planks, reinforced weak corners, and ensured that steps remained even. Their adjustments prevented slips and allowed workers to move through the fortress without hesitation. Not far from stairways, the wall hook adjuster examined metal hooks used for hanging tools, buckets, or cloths. Hooks loosened over time or bent slightly from use. The adjuster tightened them, replaced bent pieces, and ensured each hook aligned straight. Their work kept items organized and easy to find. Another quiet contributor was the table leg trimmer, who focused specifically on large communal tables. These tables sometimes rested unevenly on stone floors due to changes in humidity or subtle shifts in the building. The table leg trimmer carefully shaved small amounts of wood to restore balance. They used simple measuring tools and tested their adjustments by gently rocking the table, stopping only when it stood steady. Finally, among the quiet fixers was the object restorer, someone who repaired small items before they ever reached the point of breaking. Their specialty involved early detection. They examined baskets for loose weaving, checked stools for minor cracks, resecured tool handles, and replaced fraying cord on pouches. Their work followed no fixed schedule. They moved instinctively, guided by the slightest signs of wear. Throughout the day, the quiet fixers crossed paths with one another, exchanging soft greetings and occasionally sharing tips about tools or materials. They worked in the background, weaving small acts of maintenance into the rhythm of fortress life. By evening, after many small repairs and adjustments, they completed their final rounds. They returned tools to shelves, stored leftover materials neatly, and left rooms in perfect order for the next day. No one applauded their efforts. Most workers never paused to consider how much care went into keeping the fortress stable beneath their feet. Yet without the quiet fixers, shutters would stick, doors would squeak, ladders would wobble, buckets would crack, and countless tensions would build unnoticed. Thanks to their patient hands, however, everything functioned smoothly. The fortress remained a place of soft rhythms, tidy spaces, reliable tools, and calm order, its daily life supported by those who repaired problems before they ever began. Inside the thick walls of a medieval fortress, physical space mattered as much as tools, supplies, or daily routines. Rooms varied in size and purpose: small storage chambers, sprawling kitchens, narrow stairwells, dim side corridors, open courtyards, quiet working spaces, and shadowed corners where people paused to rest. All of them had to remain usable, safe, and comfortable despite the constant movement of dozens or even hundreds of workers. This hidden balance depended on a group of workers known informally as the space keepers. They were not cleaners, although they often tidied small items. They were not organizers, although they maintained order. They did not enforce rules, yet every room they touched naturally settled into quiet structure. Their specialty was space itself, ensuring nothing blocked movement, nothing crowded the walls, and nothing disrupted the calm flow of daily life. Their work was invisible but essential. Without them, the fortress would gradually feel cluttered, confused, and difficult to navigate. With them, it remained a soft and orderly environment, where each room breathed gently and every corner felt cared for. One of the earliest space keepers to begin the day was the room clearer, whose job centered on preparing shared rooms before morning activity began. This worker entered kitchens, meeting rooms, storage areas, and even side chambers, looking for anything left out of place overnight. A bowl left on a table, a small cloth forgotten on a bench, a wooden lid set aside instead of returned to its container. The room clearer gently moved these items to their proper locations, allowing the day to start without visual noise or misplaced objects. Their movements were slow and deliberate. They did not rush, nor did they force order. Instead, they guided each room back to its natural state, leaving behind a space ready to receive a new day's tasks. Working closely with the room clearer was the corner keeper, a specialist in monitoring the small, easily forgotten spaces of the fortress. Corners served many purposes: places to store small bins, rest baskets, lean brooms, or set down items temporarily. Without consistent care, corners quickly collected clutter. The corner keeper walked through each hallway and room, examining every nook. They removed items blocking footpaths, straightened leaning tools, and stacked small items neatly so corners felt open rather than crowded. Their job made the entire fortress feel more spacious. A clear corner created a sense of quiet, and the corner keeper understood this better than anyone. In larger rooms, the placement adjuster played a subtle yet impactful role. This worker walked through communal areas, workrooms, dining rooms, or storage halls, and checked the positioning of furniture or equipment. Sometimes a bench sat slightly askew, creating an uneven flow in the room. Other times, a table drifted too close to a wall, or a group of baskets blocked a walkway. The placement adjuster gently shifted items, aligning furniture with straight lines or widening narrow passages. These tiny adjustments made rooms feel intentional, organized, and calming. Just as important was the path sweeper, not to be confused with someone who cleaned dirt. The path sweeper focused not on tidiness, but on clearing physical pathways for easy movement. Their task involved evaluating how workers moved through hallways, especially during busy hours. If a path began to feel constricted, they identified the cause: a misplaced crate, a bucket that drifted slightly out of line, a broom leaning too far into the walkway, and moved it aside. The path sweeper worked quietly near transitions, between the courtyard and the kitchens, between staircases and corridors, or near doorways used often. Because of them, workers never had to squeeze through tight spaces or carry items around unexpected obstacles. Another essential space keeper was the table manager, responsible for surfaces used throughout the day. Tables served for food preparation, folding linen, sorting herbs, writing notes, or setting down tools. Over time, items often accumulated on tables unintentionally. The table manager walked through designated rooms, checking surfaces, returning items to shelves, smoothing cloths, and ensuring each table held only what it needed to hold. Their work allowed every task to begin with a clear surface, making workers feel unhurried and focused. A particularly unique role belonged to the flow shaper, a worker with an intuitive understanding of how people moved through the fortress. They observed how groups passed through hallways, whether certain areas became crowded at the same time daily, and which spaces saw little use. From these observations, the flow shaper made subtle adjustments, moving an unused bench to widen a path, shifting a basket so workers didn't need to step around it, or suggesting to another keeper that items be stored elsewhere. Their suggestions rarely sounded like instructions. They simply said, "Perhaps this would rest better here," or "This spot might open more space if cleared." And by evening, rooms flowed more naturally. In narrow stairwells, the step space guardian ensured no item ever blocked the base or top of a staircase. Workers sometimes left buckets, baskets, or cloths near stairways without thinking. Even a small object could disrupt movement in such tight spaces. The step space guardian checked these areas many times daily, lifting objects just enough to return them to the right place. Their work kept staircases safe and comfortable, preventing congestion before it happened. Further inside the fortress, another quiet worker handled one of the most overlooked tasks: the airway maintainer. This person ensured that windows, vents, or small openings were never blocked by items. Air needed to flow gently through the fortress to keep rooms from feeling stale, especially during warm seasons. The airway maintainer kept cloths away from shutters, moved baskets slightly if they blocked ventilation pathways, and opened or closed shutters based on the day's light. Their adjustments created spaces that breathed, cooler in warm afternoons and comfortably still in mornings or evenings. The entryway keeper held responsibility for all door-related spaces. Doorways were natural bottlenecks. If too many items clustered near entrances, traffic slowed and rooms felt cramped. The entryway keeper visited every doorframe, making sure nothing blocked the threshold. They straightened mats, adjusted shoes or tools placed nearby, and ensured each doorway opened fully without scraping against baskets or benches. Their contribution was subtle but essential. They kept transitions smooth, so workers felt welcomed, not hindered, as they moved from one room to another. An equally important role was held by the quiet divider, a worker who managed how shared spaces were divided. In rooms where multiple workers performed different tasks, it was easy for boundaries to blur. Someone cleaning a surface might place items near someone preparing food. A group sorting herbs might drift into a space used by the message keepers. To prevent confusion, the quiet divider adjusted the layout gently, moving tables a little farther apart, shifting tools to one side, or placing a small cloth to designate a preparation area. These silent boundaries kept everyone focused while maintaining harmony. The storage spacer was responsible for shelves and storerooms. Their task was to ensure nothing became crowded or stacked too high. Overfilled shelves created clutter, and clutter created anxiety. The storage spacer rearranged items, leaving small gaps between objects to allow air to circulate. They spaced jars evenly, set baskets with enough room to be retrieved easily, and ensured the storeroom never felt overwhelming. Their spacing made retrieval smoother and reduced the chance of items falling or breaking. Next came the mat aligner, who focused on floor coverings placed near entrances and busy transition areas. Mats shifted frequently underfoot. Even a slight tilt made a corridor feel messy. The mat aligner straightened mats several times daily, smoothing out edges and ensuring no corners folded upward. They also replaced mats that moved too easily, selecting heavier ones for busy spaces. Nearby, the bench positioner ensured that seating areas felt calm and balanced. Benches were placed along walls, under windows, and near workrooms. If one bench drifted too close to another, the space felt cramped. If one angled oddly, the room felt uneven. The bench positioner walked through shared spaces and adjusted seating so benches aligned neatly, providing comfort for workers during breaks. A more sensitive role was held by the quiet separator, who noticed when rooms began to feel too busy or when people worked too close together. Without disturbing anyone, the quiet separator adjusted the environment to create comfortable space. They moved baskets, shifted tools, or suggested using an adjacent room. Their keen sense for social distance maintained harmony, preventing overcrowding even during busy hours. One of the most unassuming but essential keepers was the wall space watcher. They checked walls for items hung too densely, hooks filled with tools, cloths layered too thickly, or baskets leaning against the stone. By spreading these items apart or relocating them, the wall space watcher created visual calm, allowing the fortress interior to look organized and breathable. Finally, the evening spacer ended the day's work. After most workers left common rooms, the evening spacer walked through the fortress one last time. They corrected misalignments caused by the day's activity, returning every room to its natural balance. They straightened benches, smoothed cloths, spaced out baskets, and cleared entryways. Their efforts prepared the entire fortress to greet the next morning with the same quiet order it held at dawn. By the time lamps flickered softly and footsteps faded into silence, the space keepers had shaped the fortress into a calm, breathable environment. Their work created clarity, comfort, and continuity. Without them, even the strongest stone walls could not prevent the subtle chaos that daily life naturally produced. But with their gentle adjustments, the fortress felt spacious, coordinated, and peaceful, every corner cared for, every room ready for the tasks ahead. Inside a medieval fortress, life followed a natural rhythm that changed with the sun. Light shifted steadily through narrow windows, warmth gathered in some rooms while cool air settled in others, and the flow of people rose and fell depending on the tasks of the hour. These changes happened gradually, almost too softly to be noticed by those busy with work. Yet they shaped the comfort, efficiency, and mood of the entire stronghold. To maintain balance inside this living structure, the fortress relied on a group of calm, perceptive individuals known as the daytime watchers. Their job was not to organize tools, sweep floors, or deliver messages. Instead, they observed. They watched how sunlight touched different rooms, how warm air moved through corridors, how workers crossed paths, and how the overall rhythm of daily life unfolded. From these quiet observations, they made small adjustments that kept the fortress steady and peaceful. The first of these watchers began their duties not long after sunrise. Known simply as the light monitor, this worker walked slowly along hallways and through open rooms, studying how the morning sun entered the fortress. The sun's angle changed through the seasons, and the light monitor knew that each month brought new patterns. In winter, sunlight arrived lower and softer, offering gentle warmth through narrow openings. In summer, it entered more directly, sometimes making rooms uncomfortably bright. The light monitor adjusted shutters, lifted or lowered simple fabric coverings, and occasionally recommended that a table be shifted a few inches to avoid glare. Their adjustments were subtle. They made each room feel more comfortable without anyone realizing why. Workers simply sensed that the lighting felt balanced, neither too dim nor too sharp. This sense of natural harmony formed the quiet heartbeat of fortress life. Moving through the same rooms slightly later in the morning was the temperature watcher. This person observed how different materials, stone floors, wooden beams, thick walls, absorbed or released warmth throughout the day. They checked which rooms cooled too quickly, especially those facing north or shaded by towers. They felt with their palms whether walls retained cold after the night. They noted how fireplaces affected adjacent spaces. The temperature watcher opened small vents when rooms became too warm, closed shutters against midday heat, or gently guided workers to rotate tasks so no one spent too long in an uncomfortable environment. Their work prevented extremes, allowing the fortress to maintain a consistent, comforting air that supported concentration and calm activity. Another essential figure among the daytime watchers was the shadow keeper, who followed the movement of shadows through hallways, staircases, and workspaces. Shadows shifted steadily with the sun's position, sometimes creating unexpected dim areas in the afternoon. These dim spots made movement less comfortable, especially when workers carried tools or baskets. The shadow keeper addressed this by lighting lamps at specific times or repositioning objects to allow more natural light to pass through. Their work kept staircases safe, corridors inviting, and rooms evenly lit throughout the day. They rarely spoke, yet their influence shaped the entire feel of the fortress. Working alongside them was the sound pace watcher, whose specialty lay in monitoring the level of activity in different areas. This observer was not concerned with loudness. Instead, they focused on balance. If a room felt too busy, they noticed it immediately. If a hallway became unusually quiet, they also took note. Their job involved adjusting the flow of movement so no part of the fortress felt crowded or abandoned. They might suggest gently to a messenger to take an alternate route if a corridor seemed congested. Or they might bring a small task, like sorting cloth or arranging jars, to a quiet room so it regained a sense of purpose. Through these small, rebalancing gestures, the sound pace watcher maintained the gentle rhythm of the fortress. A more specific role belonged to the sun, shadow adjuster, who tracked how sunlight fell on objects that might be sensitive to heat or brightness. Herb baskets, cloth piles, wooden tools, or jars of oil. Sunlight could dry herbs too quickly, fade dyes on cloth, or warm certain oils more than needed. The sun shadow adjuster repositioned these items throughout the day, sometimes sliding a basket into a cooler spot or placing a cloth over a wooden table. Their awareness prevented many small issues long before they could arise. Another watcher, stationed primarily in busy rooms, was the movement balancer. This worker monitored how people crossed paths, how often certain furniture was used, and where natural bottlenecks formed. They understood intuitively that even slight changes, like shifting a stool by a few inches, could greatly improve the flow of movement. Their adjustments kept daily activity smooth, preventing minor congestion that could disrupt workers' calm focus. In storerooms, the airflow observer played a crucial role. These rooms stored grains, herbs, cloth, wood pieces, and delicate items that required consistent ventilation. The airflow observer monitored the faint movements of air through vents and small windows, ensuring nothing blocked these necessary currents. They shifted baskets away from walls, rearranged cloth piles, and opened or closed vents as needed. Their duties allowed stored items to stay fresh, dry, and well-preserved. A more unusual member of this group was the window light reader, a worker who interpreted how sunlight filtered through specific windows across the fortress. Certain windows served as time markers. As the light passed through them, it projected narrow beams or softened glows onto walls or floors. Workers used these natural cues to sense the time of day long before mechanical clocks became common. The window light reader ensured that nothing disrupted these natural signals. They cleaned surfaces near these windows, straightened items that blocked the beams, and adjusted shutters to maintain the clarity of these light patterns. Their work kept the fortress's internal sense of time steady and consistent. Not far from them, another watcher focused on a different environmental detail, the quietness balancer. While sound was unavoidable in a busy fortress, this worker tended to areas that needed calm. They gently redirected bustling tasks away from quieter corridors or ensured doorways leading to calm rooms remained unobstructed. Their presence preserved spaces where workers could rest briefly or concentrate on detailed tasks. The traffic observer maintained a high awareness of foot movement across the entire fortress. They walked slowly through busy areas like the courtyard, kitchen entrances, or main corridors, watching how people moved during peak hours. If movement began to feel uneven or chaotic, the traffic observer intervened subtly, sometimes by shifting a mat, other times by advising a runner to wait a moment before passing through. Their subtle timing skills kept motion smooth and predictable. Another essential role belonged to the object drift watcher. In a bustling environment, items often drifted from where they belonged, sliding along tables, being nudged by passing elbows, or shifting slowly under repeated use. The object drift watcher noticed when a basket sat too close to an edge, when a jar crept into a walkway, or when tools gradually formed disorderly clusters. They repositioned everything with quiet precision. Their small interventions protected objects from falling and prevented clutter from forming. The temperature flow tracker had a slightly different perspective from the temperature watcher. Rather than focusing on individual rooms, they monitored how warm or cool air moved across the fortress as people worked, fires burned, and vents opened or closed. They understood how heat rose through stairwells or how cool air seeped through shaded passages. They adjusted shutters, opened vents, or advised workers to rotate tasks to avoid uncomfortable temperature shifts. A key figure among the watchers was the shadow flow observer, who specifically monitored how shadow movement affected worker comfort. Long shadows could create deeper contrast, making it harder to see small objects or read written notes. The observer adjusted lighting gently, lifting shutters slightly or placing lamps strategically. Their work allowed delicate tasks, sorting herbs, sewing linen, recording lists, to continue smoothly through changing light. Nearby, in areas prone to clutter, worked the open space maintainer, whose job was to preserve areas of emptiness. In medieval fortresses, empty space held deep importance. It allowed movement, provided safety, and reduced anxiety. The open space maintainer ensured storage rooms had clear walking areas, that courtyards had open patches where workers could rest, and that dining rooms maintained pathways between benches. They moved items gently, creating spaciousness without altering the room's function. Some watchers focused on high places. The upper air observer monitored balconies, upper corridors, and places near ceiling beams. Heat often collected in these spaces, and air needed time to disperse naturally. The upper air observer made sure no cloths blocked high vents and that stored items did not gather dust in stagnant spots. Their oversight improved airflow throughout the entire fortress. Another watcher, known as the corner light reader, specialized in the lighting of hidden corners. Some corners required more illumination, while others needed soft shade. They adjusted candles, small lamps, or shutters to maintain visual harmony. Their goal was to prevent any corner from feeling forgotten or too dim, preserving a sense of comfort in every nook. One of the most intuitive roles belonged to the rhythm observer, who monitored the daily rhythm itself. They walked through the fortress listening to the pace of work, the steady chopping in the kitchens, the soft brushing in the halls, the calm footsteps of runners, the quiet creak of shutters. If the rhythm felt too fast or too slow, they made gentle suggestions, a short pause in a certain room, an earlier start in another, or a slight shift in workspace. Their awareness helped the fortress avoid rushed or stagnant periods, encouraging a smooth, continuous flow from morning to evening. As the afternoon progressed, the comfort balancer stepped through each major room, assessing whether workers seemed at ease. They weren't supervisors. They simply noticed postures, quiet size, or the way people paused at certain spots. If a bench needed to be moved closer to sunlight or a table needed to be repositioned to catch more breeze, the comfort balancer handled it without fanfare. The final watcher of the day was the evening light guide, who ensured the fortress transitioned gently from daylight to lamplight. They lit lamps slowly at first, matching the fading glow of the setting sun. As shadows deepened, they adjusted the brightness in hallways and workrooms until the entire fortress glowed softly. Their timing helped workers wind down gradually, making the atmosphere calm and restful. By the time dusk settled quietly over the stronghold, all the daytime watchers had shaped the fortress into a harmonious, balanced environment. No one noticed their individual touches, but everyone felt the result. A calm space where the day unfolded naturally, without abrupt changes or discomfort. They were the keepers of balance, guardians not of walls or gates, but of light, air, space, movement, and mood. Their watchful presence kept the fortress serene, making daily life inside those stone walls feel steady and peaceful hour after hour. Thank you for staying with me through another gentle journey into the quiet world hidden behind medieval fortress walls. If you've made it all the way to the end, I hope this calm walk through forgotten routines helped you unwind, slow down, and breathe a little easier. These stories remind us how much of history was shaped not by noise or grand events, but by the steady hands of ordinary people working patiently day after day. If you enjoyed this peaceful exploration, don't forget to like the video. It really supports the channel. And if you'd like to hear more calm, soothing stories from the quieter corners of history, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. Before you drift off or head out, I'd love to hear from you. Which part of fortress life felt the most interesting or relaxing to you? Leave a comment. I always enjoy reading your thoughts. Sleep well, rest deeply, and I'll see you again in the next quiet chapter of history.